Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Create, a series where we create mechanics from popular games using blueprints. Today we will be covering the Sentinel shield throw from Destiny 2. This ability allows you to throw a shield, which will hit an enemy, then bounce off onto other enemies within its radius. If you have been following along with the Let's Create so far, you would have the third-person template imported into your project. If you don't, make sure to go to Add New, Add Feature or Content Pack, click on Third Person Template, and import that into the project by adding it. Once you've done that, go to the Third Person Blueprints, and then we want to add in 3 of these characters. These are the characters that will be hit by the shield, and it will home from target to target until all of them have been defeated. Now, when they're hit, we want to have a cool effect, which is going to be the ragdoll. So open up the third person character, and inside of the third person character, go into the mesh, scroll down to collision. Now on the mesh itself, if we change the collision preset from character mesh to ragdoll, when we hit our target, don't worry too much about the warning. When we hit this target with the shield and it has ragdoll available, we can set the physics and it will fall and ragdoll onto the ground. So that's all we need to do for the third person character. The next thing we want to do is go into blueprints, right click, and create a new blueprint class. Go to actor, and this is going to be the BP underscore shield. Now on the shield itself, it requires a few components. The first one is a mesh, so we're going to just add a sphere for now, and we're going to turn this into a kind of shield. Disable the snapping objects on the scale, press R, and we're going to scale it down on the blue to something like this. Re-enable the snapping on the scale, and we're going to call this our shield mesh. Add another component, and this is going to be a collision, sphere collision, and we're going to call this one the shield detection radius. And make sure it's not parented by just clicking and dragging it out. We're going to make the size of this around, we'll make it, well, not that much, something like 800 for now. So when the shield, and I believe the shield scale is a bit too big, let's see. Oh no, that should be fine. Let's increase the radius by, let's try 3000, 5000, and that will work really nicely. Maybe 4500, that's better. Okay, and I'm just going to delete this out of the scene and go back to the blueprint. So we have the shield mesh, which is going to collide with the third person characters, and we have the shield detection radius, which is going to overlap and detect the enemies so we can home in on them. For the shield mesh to function properly, we need to double click on the static mesh, go to collision, simple collision, and we just want to make sure it has collision. Just in case yours doesn't, I'm going to remove mine, collision, and just add a sphere collision. And you'll see it's mapped properly to the sphere. I'm going to hit save, close this window, and now I know that this object has collision on it, and this one does as well. We can add the final component, which is the projectile movement. Inside of the projectile movement, we have a few settings. Now, I will explain what each of these do, and I'll give a few examples of what you can change later on if you want a different type of homing projectile. The first thing we need is an initial speed. So I'm going to set the initial speed and max speed to 1000, as I found those worked really well. I'm going to enable rotation follows velocity. That way your object can rotate as it is thrown if you want that effect. We're going to disable the projectile gravity, as we do not want this projectile to fall to the ground. We want it to fly directly into the enemies. We're going to enable homing projectile, which will allow it to home as long as we give it a target in the event graph. And one of the last things we need is the homing acceleration magnitude. This is really important. I will show you why, but for now set it to 25,000. And the reason this is really important is if you set this too low, it will kind of orbit around the target. If you set it higher, it will move directly to the target, and I will show you how that works after we set up the functionality. With this functionality set up, we can go into the event graph and begin setting up all of the blueprints. So let's delete these default nodes, drag this out for some more room, and we're going to start off with our shield detection radius, right click on overlap, scroll up, and you'll see on component begin overlap. We are then going to check for another actor and cast to the third person character, which is the character in the scene that we want to hit. On the character itself, we need to add a variable, and the variable is to check if it is alive or if it is dead, and that will happen when it's hit. So to add this, click on one of these, go to edit third person blueprint, and in variables, hit the plus button and type in is alive. Hit compile and then make sure by default it is alive, because when they spawn they are. Save that, and we can close that now. So the first thing we want to check is this component that we're going to home in on, well, is it alive? So is alive, get is alive. Then we'll have a branch to check if it is. If this component is alive, that means we can actually move towards it. In order to store the multiple characters that we could possibly overlap, we need an array. This array, we're going to hit plus on the variable. We're going to call this entities to destroy. We're then going to make it an array, and we want to make sure that it is an actor reference. We're going to drag this out and get it, and we're going to drag it out to here and type in add. The reason why we need to make it an actor reference is because this output here is going to give us a reference to this character, which is an actor, which we can add to this. That way, both of these data types are the same. To make this a bit neater, I'm just going to double click, make these little nodes here, and double click here and bring this down to here. So we find one in the radius and we add it to this array. And this here is a collision event to detect enemies. Once we find one, initially we need to move towards it. So in order to move towards our first target, we need to use the do once node. So what this will do, it will only activate all the nodes after this once. The reason why we're doing this is because initially we need to home in on the first target we see. We're going to do one more cast. So from here, we need to drag out and get a copy. We are then going to, from get a copy, cast to the third person, cast to third person character. Once again, double click and drag this out here. Then from here, we can drag out our projectile movement and set homing target component. This is going to set the target for our shield, which is going to move towards, and the target we actually need to create. The reason why is if we just set the third person character, it will move towards the feet of the character, as that's where the origin point is. So if we go into edit and click add component and add a scene component, we can actually keep this in the center. Or if you want, you can actually put it up here. Wherever you put this is where the shield is going to fly towards. So let's say we have it somewhere around here. So that's 40 for me. This will be the homing location. Compile and save that. We can close that again. From here, we can drag out get homing location, which will be at the bottom, and we can make that the initial target. And from here, we can select all of this, press C, and type in home onto initial target. Down here, we are now going to add the functionality so we can hit the target and continue homing onto various targets. So on the shield mesh, we're going to right click, begin overlap. We're going to do a cast once again for the other actor, so cast to third person character. So when we hit the third person character with our shield mesh, we're going to do something called, so drag out from the as third person character, set simulate physics on the mesh. Remember before on the mesh we made it so it could react like a ragdoll. By doing this and setting the simulate to true, when the shield mesh overlaps with this character and hits it, it will simulate ragdoll and fall to the ground. Because it's simulating ragdoll and is falling to the ground, we want to drag out and make sure we set is alive to false. That way, it will no longer add it to the array. The last thing we want to do on this part is to actually drag out, and we want to remove, and we're going to remove an item. And the item that we're going to remove is this third person character, which we have defeated. Double click here, just make this a bit neater. And over here, you can double click and double click here, drag this up to here. You don't have to do this, by the way. I like to keep everything really readable. So once again, the shield mesh is going to hit the third person character, set simulate physics so it falls like a ragdoll, make sure it's no longer alive, so we stop adding it to the array if we overlap it again, and remove it from the array so we can move on to the next target. Now, we need to move on to the next target. In order to move on to the next target, we need to drag out and create a branch, because what happens when there are no targets left? We need to destroy the shield itself. In order to check if there's no targets left, we can simply drag out from the get. Actually, we can drag out just from the array. We can get the last index, and we can check if this is greater than or equal to 0. If this is greater than or equal to 0, that means that there are still enemies in the array. If it is less than 0, that means all the enemies are dead. So this is pretty simple. If it is less than 0, which is false, we're just going to destroy the actor. If it is greater than 0, we're going to do another cast. So from here on the get, we're going to drag out, cast to third person character. And now we're going to do the exact same thing we did up here. So we can just grab this if we want and copy it, but we're just going to take this node here, so projectile movement, bring it down here, and set homing target component. And the exact same thing we did up here, get homing location, and we can then set it in here. Now, if you're wondering why we're doing this down here and we're doing it up here, is because if you remember, as I said before, and these comments will help quite a bit, so let's drag this over here. We're going to comment this section, collision event with enemy. And then this bit here will be, press C, target, next, enemy, or destroy shield. So, if you remember before, I said initially, when you get in the radius, the first time that the disk is alive and it's in the radius of an enemy, it needs to have an initial homing location. After that, it can home in on an enemy after it's defeated another enemy. If we were constantly homing in on all the enemies in the array, it wouldn't know where to go and which enemy to hit. So we only want to move to the next enemy once we have hit one, and once this enemy is no longer alive. That is why we have it set up this way. The next thing we need to do, because the shield is complete, is set up the character, and then we can try and see what the shield looks like in game. So we can minimize this, and on our FPS character, we're going to create the Sentinel character, as that's the character in Destiny. So right click on the FPS controller, duplicate, and we're going to call this the BP underscore Sentinel character. Open this up, and we're going to just create a location for our shield to spawn at. So add component, a scene component, and this will be the shield spawn location. We'll set this somewhere around here for now. Mini correction here, make sure to drag the shield spawn location underneath the camera. That way you can shoot into the air. Go to the event graph, and down here we're going to set up the ultimate ability. So we're going to create an event for future episodes if we have other projectile ultimates, and you'll see what these are. They're pretty much functions, but in the function we can't have a delay node, so we're going to create an event here. So create a custom event by right clicking and typing custom event. This will be the projectile ultimate, and this projectile ultimate can be called anywhere. So if I was to type in now projectile ultimate, see how it comes up as a function? I can call this. So anything I do after here, I can call through here. For example, if I was just to type in, say, Q for the keyboard event, when I press Q, I want to use the function projectile ultimate. When I press that, it will now do whatever's here. So I can highlight this, press C, and type in spawn projectile ultimate. And over here now, I can set up the projectile ultimate. So we want to, on the variables, hit plus, and we need a variable called can shoot ultimate. We also need one more variable, which is the ultimate cooldown. And the only purpose of these, and this will be a float, the only purpose of these is to have a cooldown time between each use of the ultimate. So we can simply drag out and get this, create a branch, drag out here. If we can shoot the ultimate, we're going to set can shoot ultimate to false, so we can not spam the ultimates continuously. We're going to spawn an actor from class. Now, the class is the BP underscore shield. To make this event really useful, we're going to click on the custom event, add an input, and we're going to call this the projectile to spawn. We're going to then change this. This is a class from an actor. As you can see, the data type here. So we're going to make this the actor, and then we're going to highlight here, and you'll see class reference. We can then drag this into class, and I'm just going to double click here to make this a bit neater. Now, this setup is really important because from now on any character I duplicate from the Sentinel character, for example, which I spelt wrong, I'll change that after. Anything I duplicate from here from now on, I can just left click, select class, and tell it what I want to spawn. So if we have different ultimate projectiles, we can easily set this up here and we don't have to create a unique set of nodes every time. That is why a function is really great, and that's why these inputs are really awesome. So if you left click here on projectile to spawn and type in BP underscore shield, we can now spawn that shield. Before we go on, we need a few more things. So if you remember, we created this shield spawn location, so we're going to get that. It's currently a component, so let's get the world transform, get world transform, and plug that into world transform. The next thing we're going to do is add a delay node, and this will be set to the ultimate cooldown duration time. So if I set this to something like 2 seconds, every 2 seconds I'll be able to throw my ultimate. And if I set this to true, I can actually trigger this event. The last thing is, of course, we've set it to false here. After 2 seconds, let's set it to true. So set can shoot ultimate to true. Now we can highlight all this, press C, and this is the ultimate ability event, which we can call whenever we want. Compile and save. Now if we minimize this and go to our FPS game mode, which I believe is the current game mode we're using, so go to settings, project settings, and let's make sure it is. For some reason it's taking a while to load. Oh, there we go. So in project settings, go to the maps and modes, and our current game mode is FPS game mode, so let's go back into here. And we're going to set it from, so last lesson we did Zarya character. Let's set it to the BP Sentinel character. Compile and save that. I'm just going to quickly fix that typo. Added an extra R. Alright, let's see what happens. So I'm going to press play. And when I press Q, we throw it. It's currently stuck on this enemy. It is homing, which is great, but it is stuck on this enemy. So we need to figure out why it's not destroying it. In order to figure that out, let's go back to our shield and see what's happening here. So the shield mesh, which is currently set to, okay. Whoops, I just dragged that. Let me fix this. This is a really easy fix. We are using an overlap event here. If we go to the shield mesh, you'll notice we didn't yet change the collision. It's currently on block all, so it can't possibly do an overlap event. In order to fix this, we simply go from block all dynamic to overlap all dynamic. Compile, save, hit play, and now it should hit each enemy, and they will ragdoll. Let's see that again. So I'm going to press F11 for full screen and Alt P to play. So I'm going to press Q, it homes in and takes out all 3 enemies and destroys itself after. I can press Q again, and you'll notice that because we have that is alive boolean, it is not going to try and hit these enemies. Press F11 to get out of full screen. Now, I mentioned before that in projectile movement there was something about this magnitude. So from this value, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to set this to something like 5,000. Compile and save that. Hit play. And you'll notice it orbits around until it eventually hits the enemy. So if you want something that orbits a bit more, you can definitely have something like that. If you set it even lower, let's say 2,000, compile and save that, press play. You can set out a bunch of these, and it'll take forever for them to hit the enemies. In a way, it's it's kind of cool. But let's set that back to the original value. And check this out again. So Q, hit, hit, hit. And that is, as far as I can tell, how it works in Destiny. I haven't played it, but I checked out the footage, and I really liked it. You can also think of this as Captain America's shield. 1, 2, 3. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'd wanted to cover a Destiny character for quite some time, and I saw the shield throw from Destiny 2, which looks really cool, and I wanted to figure out how to do it in Unreal Engine 4, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe, and if you want to support this type of content, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.